The Montana Territory, in the autumn of 1882, was a land of sharp winds and sharper truths. East of the crazy mountains, Ezekiel Zeke Caldwell stood by the corral, his gaze cutting through the dust kicked up by the relentless prairie gusts. His ranch, the Lone Pine, was running on a skeleton crew, a lone cowboy in the bunkhouse, and a temporary cook who'd quit after a week. What Zeke needed was a woman who could handle 3 meals a day for 6 hungry men, keep the kitchen spotless, and endure the crushing silence of the frontier. What he got was Ellara James stepping off the stagecoach with a toddler clinging to her hip. The coach groaned to a halt, its wheels spitting gravel. Ellara descended her worn boots, sinking into the dirt, her sun-faded dress clinging to her frame. But it was her eyes that stopped Zeke, cold pale green like sagebrush, after rain weary but unbroken. "Mr. Caldwell." Her voice was steady, though the boy in her arms fussed his tiny fingers tangling in her shawl. "I'm the cook you hired. The letter didn't mention children, but here we are." Zeke's throat tightened as the boy turned his face, round cheeks wheat gold curls, and above his left brow a birthmark, a mirror of Zeke's own. The child blinked awake, and Zeke's pulse stuttered. Those steel blue eyes were his. Every damn detail. Inside the ranch house, the fire popped in the hearth, casting long shadows. Ellara settled at the rough-hewn table, the boy Caleb now drowsing against her shoulder. Zeke slid a tin cup of coffee toward her, his voice rough. "That boy's got my mark, my eyes." Ellara didn't flinch. "I noticed. A beat. We met in Dodge City 5 years ago." The memory hit Zeke like a stray bullet, a saloon bathed in lantern-light rain hammering the roof, a woman in a blue dress, laughing as he tripped over his own boots. One night. No names, no promises. "You never told me," he growled. "You left before sunrise." She shot back her chin, lifting. "By the time I knew about Caleb, you were already gone. I wrote to the address you mumbled when you were 3 sheets to the wind. Never heard back." Zeke paced to the window, the weight of it all pressing down. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal. "So why now?" Elara's fingers tightened around the cup. Needed work. Needed to know if the man who walked away was worth finding. Her gaze locked onto his. "Turns out you're harder to shake than a bad reputation." Just then, Caleb stirred his small hand, patting Zeke's arm, where it rested on the table. A silent question. A reckoning. Zeke exhaled the truth, settling into his bones. "Some storms you don't outrun. You build a shelter." The morning air was thick with the smell of coffee and fried bacon when Zeke caught Elara's wrist mid-motion as she reached for the flour bin. Her skin was warm, rough from work, and for a heartbeat, neither moved. "You don't have to mend my things," he said, voice low. "I ain't paying you to be my seamstress." Ellara tugged her hand free, her lips quirking in something that wasn't quite a smile. "And I ain't doing it for pay." She stabbed the needle into the fabric with more force than necessary. "A man who rides out with his long johns flapping in the wind is a distraction to his crew. Bad for morale." Zeke barked a laugh. Sharp, unexpected, and Caleb, now awake and perched on a stool, giggled into his milk. The sound was foreign in that kitchen, like a bird singing in a dust storm. By noon, the ranch hands had devoured Elara's cornbread and whispered about the way the boss kept lingering near the house instead of riding fence lines. Zeke ignored them. He had bigger problems, like the way Caleb had started shadowing him, tiny boots crunching gravel behind him like a determined duckling. Or the way Elara's gaze lingered on the old rifle above the hearth, a Winchester 73, same as the one she'd used to drop a rattlesnake at 30 paces yesterday without blinking. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Zeke found her on the porch, mending that damn seam by lantern light. He dropped into the chair beside her, boots propped on the rail. "You ever shot a man?" The question hung between them, blunt as a hammer, Ellara didn't look up. Once, Drifter tried to take more than a meal at a roadhouse near Laramie. Her needle flashed. He didn't get the chance to regret it. Zeke whistled through his teeth. And here I thought you were just a cook. Funny. Her voice dripped with dry amusement. I thought you were just a rancher. She snipped the thread with her teeth and tossed the trousers at his chest. Try not to ruin these before Sunday. Caleb chose that moment to barrel onto the porch, clutching a mangled dandelion. For you, he announced, thrusting it at Zeke. The flower was half crushed, its stem slick with toddler sweat. Zeke took it like it was made of glass. Hell. 5 days ago, he'd been a man with nothing but land and ghosts. Now he had a woman who could stitch a wound as neat as a hem, a boy who brought him weeds like they were gold, and a heartbeat that wouldn't steady. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped, laughing at the universe's joke. The storage room smelled of pine resin and old leather, the kind of scent that clung to memories. Zeke hauled the last crate into the hallway, sweat tracing a line down his spine. Behind him, a small voice piped up, "Mama says you're building me a castle." Caleb stood in the doorway, clutching a rusted horseshoe like a treasure. Zeke wiped his hands on his pants, fighting a grin. "A castle, huh?" The boy nodded solemnly, then held out the horseshoe. "For luck, so the monsters don't get in." Something sharp and sweet lodged in Zeke's chest. He took the offering, running his thumb over the pitted metal. "Well then, guess we'll nail this right above your bed. Scare off any monsters, bandits, or..." He leaned down, stage whispering. "Vegetables." Caleb's gasp was theatrical. "Not the peas, especially the peas." Zeke deadpanned, just as Ellara appeared with an armload of linens. Her eyes flicked between them, lingering on the horseshoe. "Teaching him your superstitions already." "Survival skills," Zeke corrected. He watched as she shook out a quilt, sun-bleached and patched at the corners, the kind that had stories in its stitches. For a heartbeat, he imagined her hands mending it by firelight in some lonesome cabin. Ellara caught him staring. "What?" "Nothing." He grabbed a hammer, tapping the horseshoe onto the wall with more force than necessary. "Just wondering how many outlaws this thing's seen. Enough to know luck's got nothing to do with it." She spread the quilt over the freshly swept floor where Caleb's bed would go. Then quieter. "You're good with him." The admission hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. Zeke cleared his throat. "Kid's easy to like. Got your stubbornness, though. Liar." Elara's mouth twitched. "That's your chin he's got. Your temper, too." She nodded toward the window, where Caleb was now, helping by throwing dust motes into sunbeams. "See how he glares when things don't go his way, pure Caldwell." Zeke barked a laugh, startling himself with the sound. For years, this house had echoed with silence. Now it held laughter, the clatter of small boots, and the crisp snip of Elara's scissors as she cut fabric for curtains. That night, after Caleb was tucked into his new room, Horseshoe gleaming a carved wooden bull from the bunkhouse crew, guarding his pillow, Zeke found Ellara on the porch again. The moon painted her in silver and shadow. "You know," he said, leaning against the rail, "that quilt, the blue one." Her shoulders tensed. "What about it? Recognize the pattern. My grandmother made one like it." He turned to face her fully. "Ellara James from Laramie. Except that's not your real name, is it?" The silence stretched taut. A coyote yowled in the distance. Finally she exhaled. "No, it's not." The dried apples hit the counter with a rattle, and Zeke caught the tin before it could roll away. "Pie, huh?" He pried off the lid, the scent of cinnamon, and last summer's orchards rising between them. "That a yes to staying?" Ellara shot him a look that could curdle milk. "It's a peel these or starve. Fair enough." Zeke grabbed a paring knife, the blade flashing in the lantern light. For a while, the only sounds were the scrape of steel against fruit and the distant cry of a nighthawk. Then Caleb came barreling in his hair, wild from sleep, clutching a piece of paper smeared with charcoal. "Look, I drawed Redbud." The colt resembled a spider with too many legs, but Zeke nodded solemnly. "That's damn fine work. Ought to hang it in the barn so he knows he's famous." Ellara's hand stilled on the rolling pin. "Language." "Right." Zeke ruffled Caleb's hair. "I mean darn fine work." The boy giggled, then clambered onto a chair to help with the apples, which mostly meant stealing slices when he thought no one was looking. Ellara pretended not to notice, but Zeke caught the way her lips twitched when Caleb stuffed 3 pieces in his cheek like a chipmunk. As she rolled out the crust, a strand of hair escaped her braid. Without thinking, Zeke reached out and tucked it behind her ear. They both froze. Her skin was warm under his calloused fingers. The moment shattered when Caleb gasped. "Mama, your ears are redder than Mr. Jim's whiskey nose." Ellara's flush deepened. "That's enough apples for you, little hawk." She swiped the tin away as Zeke burst out laughing, a real belly-deep sound that startled the barn cat off the windowsill. Later, with the pie bubbling in the oven and Caleb asleep in his castle, the horseshoe glinting ominously above his bed, Zeke found Ellara scrubbing flour from the counter like it had personally offended her. He leaned against the doorframe. "You know, if you stay—" She didn't look up. "If, I was thinking." He cleared his throat. "That room off the kitchen could knock out the wall, make it proper. For you." Her scrubbing slowed. "You'd rebuild your house for a woman who won't even tell you her real name. Rebuilding's what ranchers do." He stepped closer, voice dropping. "Fences, barns, lives." The cloth slipped from her fingers. When she turned, her eyes were bright with something fierce. "It's Laramie Jane," she whispered. "Not James. Had to change it after—" A muscle jumped in her jaw. After Dodge City, Zeke went very still. The pieces clicked her sharpshooter's reflexes the way she always sat facing doors. "Who's looking for you?" "Nobody living." Her smile was all edges. "Anymore." Outside, the wind moaned through the eaves. Somewhere in the dark, a wolf howled a sound that was neither threat nor promise, just the wild acknowledging its own. The pencil snapped between Ellara's fingers with a sharp crack. Both of them stared at the broken halves, one rolling across the ledger, the other still clutched in her whitened grip. "Hell," Zeke muttered, fishing the piece from the accounts column. "That's some grip you got there, Laramie Jane." She exhaled through her nose, the sound suspiciously like a bull about to charge. "Don't call me that." "Why not? It's your name." He leaned back the chair, creaking under his weight. "Unless you've got another one tucked away. Ellara, the eyebrow assassin, maybe." A muscle jumped in her jaw. Then, like sun breaking through storm clouds, a laugh punched out of her short and startled. "You're impossible. That's why you like me." He nudged the ledger aside with one finger. "Now about this supply run?" The back door banged open, letting in a gust of snowflakes and an overexcited Caleb. "Mama Zeke, the creek's got teeth." Ellara was on her feet in an instant. "What?" "Ice teeth." The boy brandished a jagged shard, his mittens dripping. "They growed overnight. Can I keep one?" Zeke plucked the ice from Caleb's hands before it could melt down his shirt. "Sure, kid. We'll start an ice museum, next to your rock collection and that dead beetle you're hiding in your pocket." Caleb's eyes went round. "How'd you know?" "Rancher's intuition." He winked at Ellara over the boy's head. "Also, it stinks like a skunk's outhouse in here." Ellara pressed 2 fingers to her temple, but her shoulders shook with silent laughter. The sight hit Zeke square in the chest, this fierce, guarded woman unraveled by a smelly beetle and a child's wonder. Later, after Caleb had been divested of frozen treasures and questionable biology specimens, Zeke found Ellara rewrapping her worn bootlaces by the fire. He tossed her a small leather pouch. "For the supply run." She caught it one-handed, the coins inside clinking. "This is twice what we need. Extras for you." He held up a hand before she could protest. Not charity. Payment for keeping 6 grown men from starving to death with your witchcraft pies. Elara's mouth curved as she tucked the pouch away. You're scared of my cooking, Caldwell. Admit it. Terrified. He agreed cheerfully. That's why I'm sending Jim with you as my taste tester. Her smile faded. Zeke. The unspoken question hung between them. He met her gaze steadily. Jim's got family in town. Makes sense for him to ride along. And if anyone from your past is watching, you won't be alone. For a long moment, the only sound was the fire popping. Then Ellara nodded once, sharp and sure. Tell him to be ready at first light. She stood pausing just long enough to brush her fingers over Zeke's shoulder, a fleeting touch that burned hotter than the hearth. And Zeke, the next man who calls me Laramie Jane gets a fork in his hand. He waited until she'd left before grinning at the empty room. Worth it. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, but the house stood firm, its walls holding in the warmth, its foundations settling deeper into the earth. The towel hung limp between them, damp with melted snow and unspoken words. Zeke watched as Ellara turned back to the stove, her movements precise, like she was measuring more than flour. The silence stretched comfortable, as an old saddle, until Caleb's voice piped up from the doorway. Zeke! I made a map. The boy charged in, waving a crumpled paper smeared with berry juice and what looked like soot. See, here's the barn, and here's the scary tree, and... He pointed to a lopsided circle. This is where the monsters live. Zeke squinted at the blob. That's my bedroom, kid. Caleb nodded gravely. Exactly. Ellara snorted, nearly dropping the spoon she was using to stir the stew. Zeke shot her a wounded look. You teaching him this sass? Wouldn't dream of it. She wiped her hands on her apron, eyes dancing. Some talents are clearly inherited. The boy, now thoroughly pleased with himself, scrambled onto Zeke's lap and began explaining his map defense system, a series of elaborate traps involving string buckets and alarmingly a live chicken. Zeke listened with exaggerated seriousness, nodding along as Caleb described how the rooster would peck the bad guy's eyeballs. Ellara set a bowl of stew in front of them. Eat, before it becomes part of the fortifications. As Caleb attacked his food, Zeke caught Elara's wrist. You ever think about teaching him proper letters? He asked quietly. Kid's got a mind like a steel trap. Her fingers tensed. I can teach him sums and script, but not... She glanced at the Fort Benton notice still folded on the table. Not in a schoolhouse. Not where people ask questions. Zeke traced the scar on her palm, a thin white line she'd gotten searing a wound shut last month. Then we'll teach him here, between the monsters and the mutton. Something fragile flickered in her expression. Then Caleb knocked over his milk, and the moment shattered into chaos and laughter, and a rag thrown from across the table. Later, when the boy was asleep and the kitchen was quiet, Zeke found the map still on the table. He smoothed it out, tracing the wobbly lines with his thumb. Outside, the wind howled, but the house stood firm, its walls thick with secrets and new beginnings. Ellara appeared in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders. You keeping that as evidence of your crimes? Evidence of genius, Zeke corrected, tucking the paper into his pocket. He reached for her hand, pulling her close. You ever think about putting this on a real map, the ranch, I mean? Giving it a name? Her breath hitched. That's permanent. Yeah. He brushed his lips against her knuckles. I know. The fire crackled, casting their shadows tall against the wall, 2 figures, 1 future, and a child's berry-stained dreams holding them all together. The peppermint tin clattered onto the table, and Caleb pounced on it like a barn cat on a mouse. His small fingers pried open the lid, releasing a sharp, sweet scent that cut through the wood smoke. Zeke, it's magic candy. Elara's hand stilled on the wool. Magic. Makes your breath sparkle. The boy crammed 2 pieces into his mouth cheeks, bulging. Zeke choked back a laugh. That's one word for it. He watched as Ellara folded the fabric with military precision, every crease exact, every edge aligned. The woman could probably make a bedsheet bulletproof if she set her mind to it. "You're staring," she murmured without looking up. "Admiring your craftsmanship," he corrected, leaning against the mantel. "That coat'll last him till he's 20. A shadow crossed her face. "If we're still—" She bit off the words, shaking her head. Zeke's chest tightened. He crossed the room in 3 strides, catching her wrist. "Look at me." When she finally met his gaze, he squeezed her fingers. "That boy's got roots here deeper than the old oak by the creek. And you—" His thumb brushed her pulse point. "You're not going anywhere unless you want to." Elara's breath hitched. Then Caleb let out an ear-splitting whistle, his latest horse call, and the moment broke. "Lord Almighty!" Zeke groaned, releasing her to press his hands over his ears. "Kid's gonna summon every Mustang from here to Wyoming." Elara's laughter was sudden and bright, like sunlight on snow. "Serves you right for teaching him that. You're the one who—" A sharp knock at the door cut him off. The room went still. Elara's hand flew to the knife at her belt. Zeke stepped in front of her, his voice dropping to a growl. "Who's out there?" "Easy, Caldwell." The familiar drawl belonged to Jim the ranch hand. "Just came to report. Got a rider coming up the North Trail." Zeke exhaled sharply. "Friend or trouble? Can't tell yet, but he's moving slow like he's carrying weight." Elara's fingers dug into Zeke's arm. "Could be a traitor. Or not." He grabbed his coat, then paused to press the peppermint tin into her palm. Their eyes locked, a silent conversation passing between them. "Be ready." As Zeke strode into the cold night, Caleb's voice piped up behind him. "Don't let the monsters get you." The morning after their wedding, Zeke woke to find his new wife already gone from bed, but the scent of coffee and something cinnamon-laced curled under the bedroom door. He pulled on his trousers, following the aroma to the kitchen, where Ellara stood at the stove, her hair loose down her back, flipping pancakes with the same deadly precision she used to handle a rifle. "Mrs. Caldwell." He droned, leaning against the doorframe. "Ain't you supposed to be recovering from your wedding night?" She didn't turn, but he saw the flush creep up her neck. "And miss teaching your ranch hands what real breakfast looks like?" "Never." Caleb, now sporting 2 missing front teeth, barreled in, then a squirming barn kitten clutched in his hands. "Look, I named him Pancake." Zeke eyed the tiny ball of fur. "That's a terrible name for a cat." "It's perfect," Ellara said, sliding a stack of golden brown cakes onto a plate. "Just like this marriage." The ranch hands gathered around the newly carved table erupted into laughter until Caleb dropped the kitten directly into the honey tin. Chaos ensued, complete with flying syrup and a very sticky cat, and Zeke found himself laughing so hard his ribs ached. Later, when the hands had gone to work, and Caleb was busy training Pancake, which mostly involved the kitten escaping into the flour bin, Zeke cornered Ellara by the wash basin. "You happy?" he asked, brushing flour from her cheek. She stilled, then turned to face him fully. "You know that ledger I keep? The one with the tiny numbers that give me headaches." She reached into her apron pocket and produced a folded page. "Turn to the back." Zeke unfolded it to find a carefully drawn family tree, their names at the base, Caleb's above, and blank branches stretching upward. Room for more. His throat went tight. Ellara pressed a kiss to his stubbled jaw. "That's my answer." Outside, the wind carried the first real snow of winter, but inside the hearth blazed, the coffee stayed hot, and the kitten finally escaped the flour bin to curl up in Caleb's lap. The spring. Caleb turned 12. A government man came riding up with papers that made the cottonwoods seem suddenly too young, their roots too shallow. "Surveying for the railroad," the stranger said, tipping his hat at Ellara, like she was just another ranch wife, instead of the woman who'd once outdrawn 3 outlaws in Laramie. Zeke spat tobacco into the dirt near the man's polished boots. "Ain't no railroad cutting through this valley." The agent smiled like a banker foreclosing on a widow. "Progress waits for no man, Mr. Caldwell." That night, Zeke sat sharpening his skinning knife longer than necessary, the whetstone singing a dangerous hymn. Ellara watched him from the porch, Pancake now a fat, battle-scarred mouser purring in her lap. "We could shoot him," she offered casually. "Bury him with the old rooster nobody liked." Zeke's laughter rolled across the yard, startling the horses. "Woman, you're terrible." "I'm practical." She scratched behind Pancake's ears. "Besides, Caleb's been needing target practice." But when the boy, no, the young man now appeared in the doorway, with his father's stubborn set to his jaw and his mother's quick hands, he surprised them both. "Let them try," he said, voice cracking between octaves. "We got the high ground, the best shooting range in Montana, and Mama's famous pecan pie. What are they going to offer that's better?" Zeke looked at his son, then at his wife, and something tight in his chest loosened. The next morning he rode into town and came back with a stack of legal papers thicker than Ellara's herb journal. "Preemption rights," he announced, slapping them on the table. "Bought every acre between here and the creek." Ellara arched one brow. "With what money?" "My charm and your pecan pie recipe." At her glare, he relented. "And the silver mine shares my granddaddy left me." Caleb whooped, tossing Pancake into the air. The cat landed with practiced dignity. "Does this mean I get my own rifle now?" "No," they said in unison. Years later, when the railroad did come curving politely around Caldwell land, like a river avoiding a boulder, Zeke would stand with his grandson on that same porch, watching the steam engines chug past. "Your grandma wanted to shoot the first surveyor," he'd say, chuckling. The boy's eyes would go wide. "Did she?" Ellara, her hair gone silver, but her aim still deadly, would call from the kitchen. "Ask the old rooster," and the wind would carry their laughter across a land that remained against all odds holy and theirs.